Yeah. So tonight we were going to talk about all things narrative. So thank you, Justin, for kind of like putting this together. I'm literally gonna just look at the event page that you built up on ASGC. I don't want this to sound too much like an interview, but Kelly, where did it all start for you?
Oh, wow. Writing, I mean, I've been writing for a long time now. So it started as a comic book writer. It started the same way everybody else does, as a stay-at-home dad. I was a stay-at-home dad and then started writing comic books, just like everybody else in the comic book industry does. And then, yeah, then eventually just it snowballed into just randomly meeting some guys from Ubisoft and when I was living in Singapore and being brought in for a writer's test and that's how it happened. And yeah, there's no, as everybody else, there's no like direct path into the industry. Everybody's story is unique, and mine also happened like 9 years ago. So what happened to me probably would never happen again because obviously things have changed the industry and the way we go into the industry. But yeah, that's how it started. It just started as writing comic books and loving that to also, hey, do you want to get paid to write for a living? And it's like, yes, please.
Yeah, I didn't even have a title technically, so I went to a very interesting art school for my bachelor's, and then they started a program that was built around ending the myth of the starving artist. What that looked like is, so for those of you who might not know, international students oftentimes cannot work in the country that they're studying for. There's a lot of restrictions around that, and so you end up having to spend more money than people that are in that state where, like, the university is, and you're not able to make that money back because you legally cannot work. The loophole, however, is you can work on campus jobs. So they set up kind of like this program called Index, and then they had like a company called the Michael Lewis Foundation, where they came in and they hired a bunch of students to just kind of like pitch games to them. So like we were paid to make games for them. I was just known as like the writing person that was putting the pitch together. Which, looking back, like, it's crazy that the first thing I ever did was like pitch to a stakeholder. That's insane. And just a lot of game jams, projects, and Latinx in Gaming had a couple of career fairs. One of their mentorship programs allowed me to connect with who was then the narrative lead for Firaxis. Um, and because of the other job fairs, I knew probably like three or four people in the company by the time that April 2022 rolled around. I had a couple of projects, and I had kind of like that connection with them. And when they ask you, do you want to apply to be a writer for Firaxis, you don't really say no. And it worked out. And since then, I've been able to kind of like launch my own consultancy and freelance with anywhere between like from small projects where, hey, I have a bunch of money left over, do you want to just do a couple of barks, although it would double A for established IPs. So it's been quite a journey. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm also keeping an eye on the chat. um Josue asked, Firaxis games, I've met some of the devs at a job fair back when I was in college. Believe it or not, they were the only game studio there at that career fair. Interesting. Yeah, I think they do have a pretty solid network, especially with like the Baltimore schools. So like UBalt, Micah, MBC, UMMBC, I think. Let me see if there were any other questions. No, we're just getting a lot of people trickling in. Uh, who asked that? Sorry. I'm... We're introducing the myth of the filthy rich. Uh, Also, this was at the time when Marvel's Midnight Suns had been released. Didn't know who they were at the time, but I'm aware of XCOM Civilization that they were on Play 2. Yeah, that so I started in August 2022. But Marvel's Midnight Suns came out December of that year, so I was able to go to the launch party, which had karaoke, and that was really fun. Yeah, let me see what else kind of like there was in the kind of like it's really just like a regular chat. Um, you've worked, I know, in Ubisoft, and then a couple of other like programs since in studios, how have you found narrative design to kind of like be assembled in the studios? Like, do you often have like a team of writers? Have you kind of like been the principal and like the sole writer, or how has that
Yeah, yeah.
process been for you?
Yes, so each one's unique. Every studio is unique, and how they do it and their processes are unique as well. That's the thing with our industry is there's no industry standard as far as how we design things, set up things. Even our documentations aren't industry standards. So at Ubisoft, we were the secondary studio. So Singapore was the lead studio was Quebec. They had a massive team of writers there. I think there was about 12 to 18 of them in Quebec, and then in Singapore there was five of us at the beginning. So I was one of the five, and then eventually we got to six, and then we went to seven, then we went down to five, and so it all changes. But yeah, so then we were just a writers' room, and yeah, we basically you get your assigned. A region. So I was assigned a few islands, did my research, worked with multiple different level designers, quest designers, and then yeah, you just set it up, communicate with your designers, talk about what you want to do in this area. Everything obviously is submitted to the historian, this and that. And then from there, I went to mobile games where I was the only narrative designer. So there I was working on multiple projects at the exact same time, work with IP characters such as Disney, Adventure Time, all those things, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon. And then yeah, that in that case it is me. It is just me, and then I'm working on all the projects. And then from there I went to Elix in China, where I was one of four, but I was a lead, so I was a lead narrative designer. And then there was three other narrative designers, and we were working on multiple projects. So that was The Walking Dead Survivors, and yeah, I was in every meeting. And then I'm also working with the other team. I'm editing their stuff, reviewing their stuff, approving their stuff. So yeah, and then other studios was at Virtuous at Age of Mythology. I was brought in to replace another narrative designer because things weren't getting approved, and so I got in there and basically couldn't change anything. I couldn't add anything, I guess is the best way to put it. Because a lot of times when you work on games, ideally the best situation is come in at the very beginning, right? Hey, we have a concept. Can you help develop the theme, the world lore, da da da? But that's not always the case. A lot of the times the case is, hey, the train's moving and you're jumping on board. The course is already set and you're just in there adjusting what they have, tweaking what they have. Sometimes you can edit stuff and adjust things, but a lot of times you can't add. You can just remove things. So with Age of Mythology, instead of the way I improved the narrative in that game was not adding things, it was actually removing things. So some of the cutscenes didn't need, the length of the time or the scope. Sometimes there was too many player beats, and so I just pull things out, test them, and then just get things approved, and then keep the train moving. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. There's definitely been kind of like a difference in the scale of different teams. So actually, like, like again, there's a difference between like the resources that a studio with the support of 2K has versus people that are like starting up their own studio, starting up like a new company, and then kind of like you're securing small funds while trying to get like, more quote unquote official funding. For Firaxis, we did have kind of like people. We had a team of maybe I think it was the credits I think included 13 writers if I'm not mistaken. But I remember kind of like a core team of five for Civ, and we all kind of like had our specializations. So when I applied, I had a certification from like about like religion. So any of the stories that had to do with religion, Latin American civilizations, or even kind of like more like that was the region that I focused on the most. Then we had somebody with a PhD in Southeast Indian studies. Obviously, like anything that had to do kind of like with those empires and civilizations they'd focus on. Somebody had a PhD in Old Norse. Someone had a title, I think, in classics, theater. So we were able to kind of like assemble that team of like, very, very specific skill sets, but all working in tandem to kind of like find a balance between what I was talking about in game design skills of how can we make history fun? Like, how can we make this engaging with the player in these kind of like brief narrative moments? Now, you compare that to kind of like teams for like a couple of clients where for Way Studios, I was the only narrative person, and even then, like because we don't have standards in the industry, it's still in the broad scheme of things fairly new. We don't, they don't. I literally had conversations where it's like, what do you think narrative is? Like, what's narrative to you? well, isn't it the lore? And I'm like, that's part of it. And so you try to kind of like build your own role within kind of like that studio. And that was mostly like building up narrative systems, and then kind of like knowing what to ask whenever I wanted to kind of like create the lore for that project. Now, in the studios that I'm working at, I'm fortunately kind of like not the only, I might be the only person in some of them for like narrative, but there's others where like I'll have like a director, or I'll have kind of like a direct report, so I don't feel like it's just one person taking ownership of the story, the quest, the missions. It's all kind of like split. So that's been kind of like pretty fun.
There's a question in chat. It's I'm curious too as well. So, what's the difference between narrating for games versus film and TV? Like, what are the nuances? Like, is it the same? Is it not the same?
Do you want to take that one first, Kelly?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, like, so a lot of, like, obviously with movies and TV shows, a lot of it starts with the script, right? So it starts with the story, it starts with the script, and then you work and build up from that, right? Where, same with comic books, right? You start with the script, you start with the story, then write the script and the artist adds what they add. Same with the actors, they add, but when you're doing video games, you're not, you're basically reacting and you're supporting. So we are a support system. So that's the biggest thing is that we have to remind ourselves when we work in a game studio, we're writing the studio's game and the studio story, not our story. So we are not making our game, we're making their game. So we are adhered to their game, their pipeline, their approvals, their reasonings, all those things. So we start with obviously you start with the core gameplay loop, whether it be fighting, match three, hidden object, whatever your game's going to be, and then we come in to support and build the develop what the theme is. Okay, we know we're going to be shooting. Okay, where are we going to be shooting? Is it going to be on Earth? Is it going to be in space? Alien, sci-fi, apocalyptic, fantasy, whatever. And then we start, high level stuff there. Then we start breaking it down into, okay, now it's like, okay, we have an idea of the story, we have the theme, we have the idea of the gameplay. Let's start building up the theme, why we're here, what we're doing, what's the story, we essentially add the reasoning and the why the player's doing what they're doing to
Yeah.
it. So that's how I see it. But Andrew, you might have a different perspective.
In film, you witness a story. In games, you engage with the story. So, games is interactive, and so you're having many different paths and outcomes where ideally, no player ever has like the same experience because there's different permutations that they can undergo. And so, knowing how to have a story that remains consistent amidst kind of like the permutations is something that is very unique to games because you need to know about like the different possibilities. You need to know if somebody maybe starts kind of like exploring this temple instead of the other one or goes to this level instead of that one. I think that the key difference too is that narrative is in service of a lot of things, right? Where my hot take is that I question whenever I see like the term narrative driven in studios because it's like, okay, what do you mean by that? Because again, there's not that clear definition. In film, you can have the writer kind of like lead the way and point towards what the eventual like production vision is going to be. But with video games, you normally kind of like have the systems in place, you have the core gameplay experience, and then you are building up a justification around those systems that are already in place, right? And so yeah, it connects and it's in service. It doesn't really lead. And that's something that I'm more comfortable with because I find that in narrative design, you kind of like have great bits of kind of like creativity that are enabled by the restrictions that you're working under.
So, Kelly answered this in chat, but Andrew, do you want to provide more context to Kira's question? For a
Yeah.
team without any writers, how do you stay organized? How do you add depth? What are the popular tools that you use?
How do you add dev and how do you stay organized? So organization, Kanban boards, my beloved, and thorough documentation. There has to be someone that's going to be like the glue between kind of like the different tasks and what needs to get done, and also somebody that owns the creative vision of kind of like the story itself, because what do these characters look like, what are their backstories, and what is the player actually seeing. So you need to have that all written down in documentation somewhere. In terms of kind of like when you don't have a writer, when my hot take is like you're always gonna have a writer in games. They may not know that they're the writer, but you're gonna have game designers that are kind of like pushed into like their responsibilities as a designer, and then also having to wear the narrative hat. But you're always going to need a justification. You're always going to need kind of like why is the player here? What are they doing? And what is the reasoning? And that connecting tissue is narrative to me. Which I think could segue into what Petunia was asking as well, which is kind of like what's narrative to us. I break it down more so in what's narrative design and then what's game writing to me. 25 years ago, fun fact, the IGDA game writing SIG actually provided an answer to that, where it is separated in that game writing is your lore, your scripts, those moments where again like you're working on a spreadsheet or you're working on a Google document. When you look into the marriage between gameplay and storytelling, that's narrative design where like you're thinking about bugs, you're thinking about systems, you are implementing and actually kind of like working in tandem with game design to justify these moments to the player as well.
Yeah, another way I explain it, so when people ask me what I do, I essentially say if there's text in the game, I either write it, edit it, approve it, or review it. And so a lot of times we're not doing it, right? So a lot of times like the combat things, for example, like when it comes to the combat systems or the mechanics, we're not the ones who write those, but we are the ones who edit, review it just to ensure it has the same lore, to make sure it has the same vibe and the same theme. And same with the marketing stuff. We're not the ones creating the marketing campaigns, but we're the ones who are looking at it, checking it, just to confirm that it is the same thing. Even with your if you're doing like a live ops or you're supporting your team, like quality assurance team, you will help them and you'll do a Bible for them and say, hey, this is how we refer to the players. For example, we don't say, hey, player, or what's up, bro? We would say, on the Walking Dead survivors, we would say, hey, survivors. That we would do that, or my liege, or my army, or whatever it is. We would help determine the theme based on that. So essentially, we look, review, edit, and approve.
So, question in chat. Countries. So you guys mentioned different countries before. One, China with Kelly, and Latin America with Andrea. So I'm curious about this too as well. This is a great question. I forgot who asked this in chat. It's probably because I hate your name. But when you write for different countries, do you have like an assistant that says, especially like Japan, right? Asia. There's different cultural accuracies that you need to do. Do you work with like a localization team? How do you stay accurate for different countries?
Yeah, so that's something that we're working on with Reality Reload, where the main topic of that game is the experience of various people in like using like working like worker visas, right? Like going through that system. So first of all, it's kind of like finding and getting testimonials on a first-hand account. It's also a process that I talked about it kind of like in game design skills as well, where the team for Civilization actually consulted with the Shawnee directly, and they had feedback and involved the tribe to be able to kind of like represent them accurately. Whenever you're working in, I think, storytelling, it's a good practice for me to kind of like ask like, why am I qualified to tell this story? And is there somebody that I may even delegate this story to? Because that's, I think, also just kind of like a good practice when you're a freelancer. It's like if there's a role where, like, for example, they might be asking for like a specific cultural background and you're not 100% a good fit, it's okay to kind of like have a list of people that you can refer whenever you kind of like need that. So I've worked with consultants in projects. We've had people that are like subject matter experts in certain communities that we were representing in our video game. And also just always look for first-hand accounts whenever possible, even though we were talking about like make building stories based on like what happened in the 1800s. Like again, if you're able to locate research, papers, documentation, letters from that era, correspondence, but anything that gives you kind of like an account from the people living in those communities or in those times, what it was like, that's going to kind of like make your writing feel a lot more grounded. And yeah, it also just depends on the project.
Yeah, and so my experience is like obviously I live in China, so I lived in Singapore. I've worked with the Vietnamese, I had Taiwanese studios, French studios, all around the world studios, even Slovenia, Alpha 7. So so when I get to the studio, the way it works is you typically have an interpreter or a translator. If you're working in another language, you have to remind yourselves that you yourself are writing the Western version of the game. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
writing the French version, I'm not writing the Chinese version, I'm not writing the Japanese version. I'm writing the Western version of the game, and then what I do is I leave notes for my localization team in my documents. So I use Excel, which everybody should learn how to use Excel, and there will be a tab and a column for the localization team. And then what you do is you leave notes to help them translate into the other language they're going to be translating into. And localization is a skill. It isn't just, hey, I'm going to take this word and translate it. No, they have to bring in the context, the meaning, or adjust our text for that language, right? So this is where we come in and we help support by leaving notes for them. But if I'm working with a team, which is another language team, like the Chinese team, for example, we'll use software. So Feishu or Lark, it's known in the West as Lark. That is a translation device. So is WeChat. WeChat is a natural translation device, way better than Google Translate, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get live translation. So I'll be in a meeting. They'll be speaking Chinese, and it'll be coming up in English subtext at the bottom. I will also have a person in the team who I can specifically talk to and confirm it's translated. We'll translate our documents, but it's also why you also don't. You don't information dump. What you do is you do point form stuff that is easy to clearly to understand and get on the same page. And so what we do is I'll do lots of images. I won't do, and I answered in in the chat about how do you get people to read your lore Bible. I said, well, one, set up a meeting. Two, don't load it with text. Put some text in there. Make sure there's images. Make sure there's lots of different things that they're easy to follow, right? So that's how I work with a team in another country. And also, if I'm working on a Chinese game and we're translating it to the Western audience, obviously I work with them to understand the lore. You do your research, as Andrea said. That's for you. You're a writer, so research. You better like homework. If you want to be a writer, you better like homework because that is literally our job is homework, and we like researching. And so I'll talk to the Chinese team. I'll talk to the Chinese experts. On Age of Mythology, we had an actual Japanese expert who I had to go to for all of the lore, and he had to approve it in when it was the Chinese lore. I had a full team. I had 32 experts giving me advice, so that
Yeah.
wasn't too hard. On Assassin's Creed, we have an actual 4 or 5 historians that you must everything gets approved through them. So it all depends on what it is. If you're working an IP holder, they're your approval person. You have to submit everything to them. They have to approve it. You have an approval process. It takes about 4 to 5 business days to get feedback. And so you must stick to their stuff, and they will teach you they will train you how to work with their, right? Whether it's Disney, Walking Dead, Space Adventure Cobra, even Age of Mythology, you have your lore person who are typically, they could be a select group of players who have played the game for forever and are better, know the game better than the people who work on it, or it could be the actual brand Bible master from the actual IP.
So that kind of tied into this other question. So you're speaking about a big team, right, Kelly? That's and Andrea too as well. What about a small team, right? Who's in charge of keeping track of lore? Like, is it up to the narrative designer and be like, hey, small
Well, I
indie team?
feel like there's been kind of like Venn diagrams of narrative people. And what I mean by that is I've noticed kind of like an increase of like narrative producers, like people that are pretty much meant like their job is to ensure that narrative is not siloed.
Hmm.
And in indie games, like you are going to have to wear multiple hats where I often wear both kind of like marketing, production, and narrative hats whenever I'm working because it's good practice to make sure that kind of like you own kind of like creative vision, but then also you have an understanding kind of like when things are going to be put in place. For an industry that I used to work at, we basically had a Google Drive where everybody kind of like took their own notes when we had calls with people whose lived experiences we were depicting in our game. And it was like a very sensitive topic, and so we had to make sure that there was also like guardrails, safety, making sure that, for example, like we had NDAs, people couldn't leak that information. So it really depends. I've seen it fall on producers that they're kind of like owning both kind of like the lore, information management, and then also the communications. And I've seen it just kind of like the whoever's kind of like the principal narrative person, not necessarily like in hierarchy, but just like the main person contributing in the team is almost like the consultant. So it's like, hey, I'm working on this character, and Art would be asking kind of like about what do you say? Consulting, like, does this look kind of like what you had envisioned in like the story for the characters?
Yeah, each studio is unique. So, I mean, I've worked on studios where sometimes it's a CUO, and that could be tricky because a lot of times they don't know a story. But and so yeah, so it depends. I mean, there's nightmares, but there's also good stories as well. There's also good experiences as well. So typically, what you do is you obviously everything you do at the very beginning is very high level. Why? Because it's all iteration, it's all change, and everything you do, as we talked about in the chat, is approval, approval, approval. You don't write it and be like, yeah, put in the game. No, you write it, submit it to your team, and typically the way it works is that you're in a meeting, you decide what it's going to be, you decide what the opening sequence is going to be, you decide what the tutorial is going to be, you decide what the first quest will be, and then you'll work with the designer. You don't just go off on your own and be like, hey, here's my story, put it in the game. No, you actually work with the game designer. The game designer will tell you, hey, here's the combat, here's what we have to do, hey, here's what we're going to do in the first level, here's what we're going to do in the second level, and then you'll work directly with them. Then you'll write the text for it, you'll submit it to the team, they'll put in the engine, you'll play test it amongst yourselves, they'll play test it themselves, we'll submit it to the team, it'll get approved, we'll edit it, feedback, and trust me, as a writer, you will get more notes and more feedback on your work than anybody else's work. You'll be in lots of group chats as well, so you'll be in like a Slack or a chats or a meetup or a Discord group with your team. And yeah, art will be submitted. Everybody will be like, oh, it looks beautiful, or thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. And then you'll submit your stuff and like, oh, I don't know, does that really, would they really say that? Or and so as a narrative writer, you always get more feedback because everybody thinks they can do it. Everybody can do it, but obviously there's different levels. And we make it look easy, so we make it look good, and make it look easy, so a lot of people think they can do it, and so you'll get that a lot of times in the studio. But yeah, so it all depends, it all varies, but there is always approval processes, and then same with the IP holders. There's even more approval processes. But yeah, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of iteration. No first draft ever makes it in the game. No second draft does either. It's usually your fourth, fifth, or sixth draft.
That's a mouthful. That is a lot. We got a question from Zhang here, who's on stage. Is your mic open, buddy? There
Oh,
you go.
I thought somebody banned me.
No, you're good. You're good. You had two questions
Uh,
in chat, so maybe you can answer them now.
yeah, I already put my questions in chat. Yeah, my English is not good, so uh, I'm not good on English, not good for speaking. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Your first question was, do you guys work with scripts more or templates more? So, let's say you're given a project. Does studios lean toward more, build from scratch, or are there templates? That's actually a good question, Wayne.
Um, well, let me explain. So basically, some of the team, what I remember, they usually working their projects like making a type of templates, such as if they want to make an indie games with horror elements, and they want to put something romantic elements, couples, and something, they will just sell all the stories like a templates and just follow it. And that's one of the way they build the flow, and that's effectful. So maybe one of their creative teams will put their put their jobs on more level designs and gameplay designs. That is their choice. But another type of indie games teams will be more focused on stories and uh, the art feelings and the whole narrative. How can I explain this? So just try to make the whole stories feel more complicated or more complex. Just try to pretend how the writer's feelings or what is his fun in this whole world or something like that. So this is my question: is what is your personally way when you're doing the job? Oh my God, what am I
Like,
talking
do
about?
you so is the question kind of like, do you work like in you like new stories, or do you work off of like something that's already existing?
So I
I
think
work
he's
in like
asking, it's about templates. Is what does the studio give you? So what
Mhm.
softwares do you use? So every studio is unique actually, and so when you work in the studios. So I've worked on studios where they don't even have character design sheets. I've
Mhm.
also worked on other studios where they give you like 12 pages to do character design. I'm like, guys, it's a mobile game. And so every studio is unique, and most people like that you start with a script, because if you're starting out and it's an indie game, people start with a script because it's basic, easier to follow. But truth be told, everything you write, if you're going to write in a script format, screenplay format, guess what's going to happen? You're going to submit your script, and then somebody's going to your team, and that person on your team is going to then take it and put it in Excel. And that's exactly what happens because that's what the devs work on and use. They use Excel. Even if you're using the game engine, even if you're using Arcweave, it all goes into Excel at some point. So what I've just done is just said, hey, I'm just going to work in Excel. I'm going to set up a narrative system, and that's a lot of things. That's where we get technical narrative designers come in, where we actually will set up the system ourselves. We'll set up the variables. We'll set up, is it going to be linear branching? Is it going to be choices? Is it going to be role play hubs? Whatever it's going to be. And that's where
uh,
we help set up those templates ourselves. So you basically start with the basics, and then you adjust it per studio, per game, per need, whatever you need. Is that what you mean?
um, um, not all of it, but I kind of understand it. So actually, I means that are you working more like an artist or more like a worker? Are you just following all the producers' needs, or you can just do it something that more creative? I
It
mean,
all
yeah,
depends
basically
on the
everyone has a
studio
flow.
and on the project. Where and also like we might not be able to get to the second question just because I want to be mindful of everybody's time. But it depends on the studio, depends on the project. So for example, if you're being brought on to like a live service games that's been online for like 6 years, then you're going to be working kind of like on a lot of things that have already been established. There's going to be processes that are already in place. But if you're being brought onto like a new IP, a new game, then you have the opportunity to kind of like build the templates yourself. And you'd have to do a lot of it from scratch. And so there's kind of like that, there's pros and cons to that. But it really just like there's no one true answer. Yeah, why are you knocking over things? There's just kind of like it depends on the game, it depends on the project.
Yeah, I think the short, long story short, if you work in established studios, they will give you stuff to work on. If you work in a smaller studio, you might have to develop these. The number one thing is make sure that your documentation is communicative, clean, concise, and collaborative.
All right. Surya Cat, is your mic working?
Yes, it is. Hi, sorry, a little bit nervous, and thank you for getting my name right. Hi, I'm Sarika, and as a writer, as a student, I had a lot of questions about the iterative process and how you learn from that. Thank you for that. You got this. I'm so nervous. For example, like, were there any specific narrative techniques or like documentations that you've carried over from like mentors or from like projects that have like taught you a lot for like RPG processes versus like writing for like a live title for like a mobile? Is there something that like you're like, okay, if I'm working on this type of project, I need to follow like a twine like structure, or if it's like a MMO or like something more like for a better purpose like gotchas, would you have to think in a more like collaborative action, and how would you handle documentation in this case?
Documentation, there's a couple of casting sheets that I've really enjoyed from kind of like past writing tests that I just kind of like try to embed in the process whenever I'm working on a new project. The other one, one of the concepts that I've really enjoyed learning was actually from my mentor, which is the ladder of abstraction. And so I'll see if I can like try to kind of like summarize it in like less than a minute. There's kind of like the essence of what a character is communicating, and then you kind of like try to make sure that that idea is communicated kind of like consistently. So if you look at kind of like the high level of the Little Mermaid, like Ariel, you have the concepts of like freedom, but then when you get more specific, it's mermaid, and then you start kind of like it's a good way to analyze characters of like what do they stand for as an idea and in like a more holistic sense. And then when you're being very granular and specific about them, how do you communicate that? So that's, I know, like a very like niche thing, but it's like a good way of kind of like knowing, especially when you're working with a lot of tropes and like in hero shooters, um just what does this character stand for and what are they trying to communicate?
Yeah, and truth be told, every game's unique. I have not had I've worked on 33, I've published 33, worked on 40 plus. Each game is unique. Each game is different. Each game has its own, problems, issues. But what I do is I typically start with a basic template that I've gotten for Excel, and then I just adjust it whatever is required, right? If it's a linear game, obviously I take out all the variables and the branchings, right? If it's so I have actually multiple. I have a linear one, I have a fantasy one, I have a match three game, I have a mobile game. I have character design documents that I use for different games, whichever I'm working on, because each game's unique, right? So obviously a match three game requires way less. You're probably writing more barks in that case. You might be just help it design some, levels or some NPCs. Whereas a fantasy game, you're going to have more intense. You're going to have a lot more characters, a lot more different designs you're going to need require because of the RPG combat styles. So each one's unique. And yeah, what I took in was I took in the basic communication of collaboration from comic books. I brought that into video games because it is collaborative. The other thing I brought in from comic books is being able to write and work within a small frame. Because in comic books, you're working within the panels. You only have a limited space. In video games, you still have a limited space because you're working within the UI dialog box, right? And your UI designer will determine that. And so you're working within there, and you must confine your text to that. So these are all things that I would adjust and brought in with past experiences.
Quick question, and I'm sorry, don't mean to keep interrupting, but we got a short amount of time, and everyone has some great questions. When writing you might have answered this before. When writing, what about people that are in charge of the politics or historical issues? Is that the same with the lore person or whatever you call it?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like working in a game about the worker visas in this climate is something that does have that, and so the main thing we focus on is in just kind of like recreating and telling the story for what it is. You don't polarize it, right? You just focus kind of like on the true, genuine stories and lived experiences of people that are kind of like going through that. And so when you're looking, and so that's for a small team, who also kind of like has legal counsel. When you're looking at larger companies, there are a couple of times where like you need to consult with legal on like certain themes. Like, is this kind of like content that are we in the clear to showcase? Because sometimes you may see, for example, that there's a lot of jobs that require kind of like AAA experience or like AAA titles, and it's not often like sometimes it is kind of like to make sure there's like a smaller pool of candidates. But in addition to that, it's do you understand what it's like to work in a game that's going to be live in multiple countries with different restrictions, different legal systems, and like how can you kind of like navigate like writing a story that has like very sensitive topics, but it's still going to be live like in the same different countries. So yeah, it would just kind of like close collaboration with like stakeholders and then also your legal counsel pretty much. Yeah, legal.
Legal, yeah.
Yeah, but no biases, no sugarcoating, just being candid and straightforward.
Yeah. All right. Let's move away from the legal mumbo jumbo and the fun question. So this is my favorite question. So both of you guys, what is your favorite story? What your character arc background? And I'm gonna throw mine in there real quick. World of Warcraft, of course. But Kelly and Andrea, what is your guys' favorite story?
Like that I've written or that I've played?
Personal, yeah. They personally, they want you to like personally. It could be your written,
I
right?
mean, my favorite narrative game that I've played would be Hotel Dusk from the old NDS system. It was a comic book slash video game, and there was basically a murder mystery that you point and click tap. I also like Broken Sword. that was one of my other favorite narrative games. But yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
In terms of like stories that I've played, probably some of my favorite moments were from Fire Emblem Three Houses. In terms that I've actually written, I'd have to think about that for a minute, and also about like what's under NDA and what's not. I'd say
Yeah,
that it was very fun coming up with ideas for the Ouroboros Express. It is a Lovecraftian visual novel that I worked on a few years ago. And so even though I was doing more sound design than narrative, being kind of like in the ideation room, kind of like trying to come up with like a different character that we're gonna have in that game, was a very fun experience. So that was probably one of the ones that I really enjoyed writing for.
yeah, and mine is like I like mine is more like little characters and quest lines. Like I just posted on LinkedIn the other day about writing Rohia, which is a fun character to write. So I like writing NPCs. I like writing, little barks and stuff like that. Those to me are my favorite little things. As an overall story, I mean, it comes down to the experience. So I love working on the Walking Dead survivors. Loved working within that world and those IP characters and that brand. I loved on the Adventure Time game as well. Space Invaders Cooper was a great fun. Like to me, it comes down to the fun experience I had at the studio, and the overall experience. Because I mean, you could be you could write your best stuff, but hate the experience because of the studio life or politics, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, it's just that's what I remember. I remember the fun moments of working with the team, the collaboration, and also seeing, oh, okay, here's what I wrote, here's what got in the game, and being happy with around 60% of what I wrote getting in the game.
Oh wow, does that happen a lot? So is that a good ratio, like 60%?
I think you should be happy with 60 to 70%. You should be static with anything higher than that. And we're talking about the overall things because obviously everything you do, you start with a script, right? You start with a script or a character design, and then eventually it goes through 4 or 5 different approval processes, right? So your initial script is never what gets in the game. But then like it's like when you design a character and you give it to your artist, and then the best day is when you get something back that was better than in your head. The worst day is obviously when it comes back and it's nothing like what was in your head. But typically that's because of your documentations and not anything else. But yeah, it does happen where it's all approval process, it's all editing. You're literally changing your script until you're voice recording it.
Wow.
My ratio is probably more in like a quarter in my career, where a lot of it, where it's like, it's common, at least in my experience, it's been common for there to be like a shift in direction, or like, somebody kind of like wanted to maybe pivot into a different scene. And then it's like the project changes, and especially because I've done so many contracts where it's like they will just kind of like jump into like with like a new person doing narrative. So it's one of those where what has helped a little bit, because it might segue a little bit into kind of like how do we show our work when like it's under NDA and all of this tape. It's working in hypotheticals. It's almost like professional fan fiction in that, a lot of my writing samples are not, you can't see the gameplay, but they'll have like a brief description of like, if I was given these resources, here's how I would develop a cinematic, here's kind of like the story and kind of like how I would expose it, or like if I was working in a title of this genre, here's kind of like the quest that I would design for it. So like making sure that it's almost like showcasing that you understand tone. And I think that was also kind of like, I want to say a question that was earlier, Justin, of um how do you adjust to like different characters and different voices. Before I was in college, I worked in a marketing agency, so being able to like change tones for like the different accounts in marketing was a skill that later translated very well into writing, because like you'll be designing quests or experiences for like a character that might be like, a sage teacher, and then next thing you know, it's more of like, a younger upbeat. So knowing how to kind of like code switch a little bit. Improv classes, acting theater also helps you kind of like really get into like the characters and know kind of like then how to write and change according to them.
Yeah. No, that's one of the questions. Like how do you continue to expand on a story, or what gets kept, and so forth. To keep it going,
Yeah.
guys, and you guys are answering all these great questions here. I'm going to combine two questions here. And Kelly, I don't think you responded to this in chat. So If you were to break in, one person's coming from a book writing style, they wrote books before, and another person doesn't have any portfolio. This is a portfolio question. This should be up your alley, Kelly. So, what's the best way, right? Whether you are transferable skills, like in the book world or entertainment world, or no skills at all, and you want to break into the door, what's your best way to showcase your portfolio? What's your best way to stay organized, or is there any tips to the audience?
Yeah, so when it comes to your work, you just showcase what you have when you have it. It is you showcase your best work as you have it, and that's the basic, right? You start with, okay, this is what I have done. I'm going to showcase it, right? And then when it comes to your portfolio, you set it up. And I do this in my LinkedIn. I have lots of tips on my LinkedIn if you want to look at my featured posts where I talk about what should be in portfolios and how to showcase your work. You want to showcase obviously character design. You want to showcase writing, a dialogue between an NPC and the player character that leads to gameplay. That's the most important thing. It has to lead to gameplay. You cannot write dialogue for a game if you do not know what the gameplay is or you don't know where you're leading because your end goal is the gameplay. So you must indicate the gameplay, you must indicate that clearly on, and you must indicate it after you're done the script. The number one mistake I always see is that they write the screenplay method, but then they forget the number one rule of the screenplay method is you don't tell a director what to do, and they get in there, the action sequence, and it's like, oh, they walk down the plinth, and there's like the light shining and this and that. It's like, no, just establish who the character is, establish the location, write the dialogue. That's all you need to do, and showcase that, and then showcase another one, and then showcase another one. But yeah, you showcase what you have when you have it. Be proud of what you have when you have it, and then get more stuff and more stuff and more stuff, and showcase more stuff. If you can go on Arcweave and make your own game, great. If you go a game jam, make your own and collaborate in a game, showcase that, right? The biggest thing is make it clear, make it short, make it clean. Nobody's going to go in there and play your game. Nobody's going to go in there and read your novel. So just keep it short. Showcase examples of your work in a clean, easily digestible manner, and then that will benefit you more than anything else. And if you have transferable skills, list it on your CV, list it on your LinkedIn, and make sure you highlight them. And once again, as you get new skills, add them, add them, add them. As you get new experiences, add them, add them, add them.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to add to kind of like that of like presenting it in a way that's accessible. There's also like you need to present the fact that you have these transferable skills, but then also that at the core you know how to write for video games because that's something where like I've seen a lot of people where they come from TV, they come from film, and they want to pivot into video games, but they don't have any samples showcasing that they know how to work within the systems and within kind of like the gameplay. That again, like that is something that you almost have to work in service of a lot of the times. And something that helped me earlier was just, first of all, showcasing that there was a way for the skills in marketing and also journalism, because I did that for a little bit. The consistency, hitting deadlines, being able to like change the tone. Um, those were skills that at the end of the day, like in narrative, you also have to do. Like you need to turn in your scripts in time, you need to turn in the narrative content in time so that you're not blocking anyone from being able to implement content. So just showing a mix of you know how to work within games, but then you also have these skills that make you kind of like a stronger candidate because you bring something new to the table that you may not know people are looking for.
Yeah, and then another thing is make sure that your documentation is collaborative, that you are communicating directly to people, right? You're not telling them how to do their job, and you're not, adding things like in your script you should never add gameplay. In your script you should never add animation. You're writing for a dialogue. You're not writing for a cutscene. Okay. The other thing is when you're writing examples, should never be links to drives or stuff like that, because as Justin can attest to, you can't click on external links. So if you put that in there, guess what? My IT team's going to flag that. We do IT procedural where it's like, do not click on external links because we watch for those things, right? So make sure it's digestible in a PDF or it is a website. If it's a drive or something like that, or there's something they have to download or a file, they won't look at it.
That's so true. And I can tell you, AAA, oh yeah, they gatekeep on those links, and
Yep.
they actually it will actually be disabled, right? It will be a big
Yep.
red X, and you can't even click on it, and then it's more work for the recruiter saying, Andrea, can you please put that whole portfolio in Google Link? I think Google Link's like the only one that we were able to use, to be honest. Other than that, it was just like, yeah, those external links are big no no, big no no.
Yes.
We're almost running out of time, and you guys are taking the full hour. You guys are doing great, by the way. I want to jump into the hot topic here, and I think everyone did a lot of emojis on this one. Can we talk about AI? How is AI being used in writing and narrative design now? Some people
It
love it, some
isn't.
people hate it. What is your guys' thoughts on the whole topic?
I literally have a contract that bans any use of Gen AI right now. It's a tool that's not really used, and I think also like I understand that it's one of those technologies where, we saw when virtual reality and augmented reality was introduced, that was kind of like what was coming next for the industry, and there's this desire to kind of like jump onto what's next. The thing is that writing also, there's a lot of kind of like solidarity and connections with like screenplay writers, TV writers, and given the ongoing like strikes and stuff, like it's not a technology that I have seen used favorably. But yeah, and also kind of like to what Kelly's pointing in the chat, there's legal issues with it, because you are working under a lot of NDAs. You're working with a lot of confidential information that is not made to the public. And so using these technologies will make it so that other people would be able to be privy to that confidential information. So contractually, and just kind of like on a more like legal and moral issue, it's just not used at all in narrative in my
Uh,
practice.
so yeah, like so as Andrea said, it depends on the studio. So I've worked on studios where it is part of the practice, but it is AI is a tool. That's what it is. It's a tool, and you need to use it the same way you use spell checker, the same way you use Photoshop, the same way you use Excel, the same way you use the game engine or Arcweave, right? So it is a legal issue and it's a moral issue. So legally, we don't know the laws yet. So we don't know the ramifications. We don't know all these things. So studios are hesitant to use it. And morally, it's an issue because the audience has not determined whether or not they're going to accept it or pay for it or validate it, right? So eventually, AI will be something like a warning or a hazard or a tag or a label we'll put on the game and say, this game was partially used by AI. Then you as a consumer will say, okay, I will use it or I won't use it. That's exactly what will happen, right? The same way, it's going to say this may contain peanuts if you're going to buy food, right? The other thing is that if you're going to use AI, you typically use it for internal concept art. So you use it for internal things to get on the same page. So if you're doing a pitch, for example, of hey, we're going to do this DLC, you're going to do it as an internal thing to get a concept art because you don't have the budget yet for a concept artist, you don't have the time for a concept artist, and that's how you will use AI to get people on the same page. Or you'll be like, hey, here's a cool character, but then what you'll do is you'll give notes, lots of details, lots of hey, change this, adjust this, and then you'll give it to an artist who will then do a concept of it, right? So it is part of the process, but it is not finalized art. Is not going in the game because of legal reasons and moral reasons. So it all depends on what it is and how it is, but it is a tool. And so, but you should not, the one thing you don't want to do when you work in a team is be like, oh, here's a cool character I designed, give them an AI art, and then the artist is going to be like, okay, that's because you're going to offend your artist, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
upset them, the same way that you wouldn't let a game designer design give a quest outline, present it to the team, and write dialogue for it. You'd be like,
Right.
isn't that my job? Right? The same way you wouldn't do, a mock storyboard and use AI art, or the same way you wouldn't do a location design and use AI art, right? But you would internally you would use it for high level, first initial things. Hey, we're going to do this kind of theme. We'll use it for that. Get on the same page, and then go forward. And then you'll bring in a concept artist and do the rest that way.
Yeah, there are like some studios that do use it internally, kind of like for exploration and ideation, and they have kind of like very clear guidances, kind of like in the Steam page about it. The other one that I've noticed too is, and this is more of like secondhand, where like I haven't worked in these studios, but I've spoken with people that do work in those studios, in that sometimes they will try to kind of like outsource and kind of like create bulk content, but more for like mobile, for like reels and like vertical content. They may look into using those tools. But in terms of kind of like any team currently, like for me, there's just kind of like contract obligations to not use it.
Quick question on the AI, and then we'll have to jump into a next topic. Sorry, guys. But without disclosing, you know, has something happened to like someone in real life where a team member was using AI without disclosing? How is that handled?
Like I said, it legally depends. There isn't that I've come across that I know. Obviously, like some countries are using it a lot, but also they have laws within their own country. So, for example, Asia, Africa, they have looser laws. Different countries, so they are using it themselves. But when the problem is once you start your game starts getting out there into the mass audience and different countries, that's where the other laws will come in, and this is where we have a legal issue because there's conflicting laws. So Europe, EU has a specific laws, where US has different laws, where Britain has different laws as well, right? And so it has come in. Also, we've had flashbacks and not flashbacks. We've had pushbacks on actual like Coca-Cola and other places, and using AI for their ads, right? So the audience so far has been really good, and we're basically following the film industry as far as what they do. Obviously, they have unions, we don't. So that's what protects them from AI, but we don't have that. So it is being used. It is being used. There is games out right now with lots of AI that have not declared it, that have not used it. But we also don't know if the ramifications are coming yet or if they will
Yeah.
come.
All right. Well, this is the
Yeah.
last 5 minutes. So
Sure.
normally we gotten through most of the questions. So you guys are doing great, by the way. You guys answered a lot of questions. Kelly answered in chat. So both Kelly and Andrea, this is your time to shine. You can talk about your current works. What do you have going on? Any last minute tips, advice, inspiration for the chat? You can drop in your LinkedIn links. Go.
Right now, I am working on Slamiverse with Flameborn Games and H1B Live in Reality Reload. So, Slamiverse, we do have a Discord server right now. It is a wrestling deck builder. So, we're really excited that we have, just announced it. Let's see. Anything else that I have planned up? I'll be giving a talk in Narrowscope about how to kind of like marry narrative design and social impact. And I think that's it that I have for announcements right now. But oh yeah, I can also
Yeah.
drop my
Okay.
link to connect with people. And you go, Kelly.
Yeah. Follow
Yeah.
Andrea.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, definitely follow Andrew. Follow anybody in the industry, especially those who are sharing information. You want to learn as much as you can. So yeah, so I'm currently doing my most recent cohort for my game design skills, game writing bootcamp. So that is a 17-week game writing course where we walk you through the entire process of how to design games. We give you templates. We give you, um, you know. The tasks, the skills, we basically walk you through your first game design project. And then also I'm doing some freelance stuff, which I can't announce because we're just starting up with the NDA. But yeah, just making games, volunteering when I can, doing game jams when I can, sharing jobs when I can, and yeah, just living life.